For centuries, we've all been fascinated by the idea of a fountain of youth. But what if the real secret isn't about stopping the clock, but about, just slowing it down from the inside? Well, today, science is actually starting to do just that. We're moving way beyond just counting birthdays to measuring how fast our bodies are really aging.
I mean, think about it. We all know somebody who seems way younger or way older than they actually are, right? Well, it turns out that's not just a feeling, it's a biological reality. The number of candles on your cake, that's your chronological age. But scientists are now obsessed with a completely different number, one that tells a much, much deeper story about your health.
And Matt brings us to the world of biological age. Think of it this way. It's a measure of how well your cells and your tissues are actually functioning, totally separate from how many years you've been around. It's kind of like the difference between the mileage on a car and the actual condition of its engine. And believe it or not, for the first time ever, we have the tools to really look under the hood.
So how in the world do scientists measure this hidden age? Well, they've developed this incredible toolkit based on something called epigenetic clocks. Now, these aren't actual clocks, but really sophisticated biological algorithms that can read the story that's written all over our DNA.
Okay, so here's how it works. As we live our lives, our DNA gathers these tiny little chemical tags. It's a process called methylation. Now, these tags don't change your genes themselves, but they change how your genes get expressed. It's almost like putting little sticky notes on a cookbook that tell you which recipes to use and which ones to ignore. Epigenetic clocks basically just read these patterns of sticky notes, which change in really predictable ways as we get older, and from that they can estimate our biological age. Pretty cool, right?
But here's the thing, not all of these clocks are created equal. Some are like a car's odometer. They give you one static number that tells you the total mileage or wear and tear your body's been through. But a newer type of clock, one called Dudini pace, is totally different. It acts like a speedometer. It tells you how fast you're aging right now, in this moment. And of course, knowing your speed is everything if you actually want to slow down.
Which of course brings us to the million-dollar question. Can we actually change our pace of aging? To find out, researchers set up this landmark study called the calorie trial. And this was the real deal, a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard in science, looking at one of the most talked about strategies out there, calorie restriction.
The setup was beautifully simple. Researchers got 220 healthy adults and just split them into two groups. For 2 whole years, one group ate whatever they normally would. The other group, they had the tough job of cutting their calorie intake by 25%. Then, the researchers used that speedometer clock, Dudini pace, to see what happened.
And the results? They were pretty incredible. The group that cut their calories actually slowed their pace of biological aging by 2 to 3%. Now, I know what you're thinking. 2 to 3%, that doesn't sound like a lot. But trust me, in the world of aging research, that is a massive deal.
Just to put that into perspective, the lead author of the study explained that this 2 to 3% slowdown translates to something like a 10 to 15% drop in mortality risk. That's an effect on par with quitting smoking. I mean, wow. It was the first time ever that a proper trial in humans proved that we can actually slow down the aging process.
Okay, so calorie restriction works, we know that. But let's be honest, it's really, really hard to do. So that brings us to the booming world of anti-aging supplements. Could a pill do the same thing? Well, another study looked into a pretty complex supplement system to see if it could turn back the clock. And, well, the results paint a much more complicated picture.
So at first glance, things looked really promising. After a year on these supplements, people showed some major improvements in key physical areas. Their grip strength went up, their scores on a chair stand test, which is a great measure of lower body strength, also went up. I mean, these are real, tangible benefits you can feel.
But, and this is a big but, when the researchers looked at those epigenetic clocks, the story got messy. See, different clocks measure different things. Some of the odometer clocks, they showed a significant decrease in biological age, which sounds amazing. But then other clocks, including our speedometer, Dudini pace, showed a significant increase. It suggested their pace of aging had actually sped up. So what on earth is going on here?
Well, if you look at the fine print, the study itself points out some pretty big limitations that make it really hard to say for sure what happened. For one, it wasn't randomized, and there was no placebo group, which is a huge deal in science. Also, people were encouraged to walk and practice mindfulness every day. So, did the benefits come from the pills or from the lifestyle changes? We just can't know for sure. It's a classic case of correlation not proving causation. All this confusion from the supplement study actually highlights a much deeper question. What exactly are these epigenetic clocks measuring anyway? To really get it, we need to compare them to another really famous hallmark of aging that you've probably heard of, telomeres.
So for a long time, the main theory of aging was something called replicative senescence. The whole idea was that our cells can only divide a certain number of times. Why? Because these little protective caps on our chromosomes, called telomeres, get a tiny bit shorter with every single division. Once they get too short, the cell just stops dividing and gets old. It was a really neat, tidy story.
But then, one fascinating experiment just blew that whole idea out of the water. Scientists used an enzyme to basically make lab-grown cells immortal. In this first graph, you can see how it stopped the cells from aging in that classic way. They just kept on dividing, no problem. But here's the crazy part. The other graphs show that even with their telomeres totally protected, the cell's epigenetic age just kept ticking steadily upward. They were still getting older on a much deeper molecular level.
And that is the crucial point right there. The epigenetic clock is measuring a process of aging that is fundamentally separate from telomere shortening. It seems to be a more central, maybe even a more important, driver of the whole aging process.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here, from speedometers and supplements all the way to telomeres. So let's zoom out and bring it all together. What does all this cutting-edge science really mean for you?
All right, here's the rundown. First, the science has leveled up. We can now measure not just our biological age, but our current pace of aging. Second, we have rock-solid, gold-standard proof that a 25% calorie restriction can slow that pace down with an effect similar to quitting smoking. Third, while supplements might give you some physical boosts, their effect on these aging clocks is messy, and we really need more rigorous research. And finally, and maybe most importantly, this whole epigenetic aging thing is a fundamental process, totally separate from the stuff we thought we knew.
And this all brings us to one final, very personal question. You know, this technology isn't sci-fi anymore. As these tools get easier to access, we're all going to face a choice. If you had a speedometer for your own body telling you exactly how fast you are aging, would you want to look? And what would you do with that information?